Yeah, hi peeps, it's Tersse on the old squat box once again, and I've been watching this programme. It's like the rewriting of history, you know, from the point of view of good Spanish Catholics, you know, trying to tell us that the Spanish Inquisition didn't happen. Now, I know that it was probably exaggerated. It was a war, after all, between the Protestants and Catholics, and nobody has anything good to say about their neighbours if they hate them. But to say that the Spanish Inquisition never happened at all, and that, you know, nobody really got killed, and people were blaspheming in the normal town jails in order to be arrested and put into the Catholic, you know, the Catholic religious jails, because it was easier to live there and they had to torture you. I think it's just dumbfounding, you know. But apparently this is what this guy's trying to say, this Herman Kamen. Now, I googled Herman Kamen, and he is a professor of history, yeah, and he's lectured in both America, England and Spain, and he's been lauded and raised to very high places in the historical sort of historical societies in both America, Britain and in Spain. But what got me was one of the things he said was, you know, in his own wiki page, he said his most memorable and the thing he loved most about his life was the fact that he got to meet personally John Paul II, the Pope, during an audience in Rome. So he's a Catholic, he's a Catholic historian, and I think he's trying to rewrite history, you know. He's trying to make out that the deeds that people say happened during the Spanish Inquisition never happened at all. I mean, it's not like he's saying it wasn't as bad as they made. He's saying it just never happened. You know, I mean, they had rules. You could only torture somebody for, like, you know, 15 minutes, and out of 7,000 people recorded as being questioned by the Spanish Inquisition in 1 year, only 2% of them were tortured for 15 minutes, and only 1% of them were tortured twice, and nobody's been recorded as having been tortured more than twice. I mean, this is how he's trying to rewrite the history of the Spanish Inquisition. Oh, they only tortured 2% of 7,000 people in 1 year for 15 minutes. Well, maybe some people talked in 15 minutes, but obviously half of the people that get tortured didn't speak, and they got tortured twice. Maybe the torture was so excruciating that even they talked or died during the torture of 15 minutes. Who knows? It doesn't say anything. It didn't say they all survived. He didn't say they were all found, you know, not guilty. Because at the start of this documentary probably was more accurate, it does say that the Spanish Inquisition had the power, if you were found guilty of blasphemy or practicing, because it's talk about Jews here, practicing your own faith instead of the Catholic faith, the punishment was being burnt at the stake. So how many of those 2% who get tortured got burnt at the stake? And what about the people who admitted to it before they got tortured? Were they let go? He doesn't say that either. So 7,000 people, did they all get burnt at the stake? Did none of them get burnt at the stake? He doesn't say that. But he says that the Spanish Inquisition aren't as bad. But the clip I'm going to show you says something very interesting. He tries to make a comparison with what's going on in the rest of the world. And he says that in the 17th century, for that whole century, only somewhere around about 50 people were killed by the Spanish Inquisition. And he's only talking here, by the way, you'll hear him say this, we're only talking here about Protestants who committed the crime of being Protestants, because they were Catholics, remember. So only Protestants who committed blasphemy. In that whole century, they only murdered 50 Protestants, not just in Spain, but in all of the Americas as well. I don't know if you know anything about the history of what Spain did when it went to the Americas, but it's hard to believe that, including Spain and the whole of the Americas, the Spanish Inquisition only killed 50 people. But then, as I say, he caveats it by saying, we're only talking here about Protestants. We're only talking here about Protestants who have committed blasphemy. Well, yes, by the 17th century there probably wasn't very many Protestants left in Spain. There was a wee corner of the country trying to become independent and break away from Spain, who were mostly Protestant. It doesn't really tell us much about what happens there, although it's mentioned in some opera. But you know, I find it hard to believe this guy. And when he says that the highlight of his life was meeting the Pope, and then it comes on this documentary telling us that the Spanish Inquisition didn't torture anybody, you know. Oh, they just couldn't possibly have tortured anybody. They had all these rules, and they were all lawyers. They weren't even priests, they were lawyers. Yeah, so maybe the lawyers didn't torture anybody, but they were probably the people who stood there and talked to the bishop about what evidence was to be presented. But I'm sure they weren't the ones extracting the evidence, you know what I mean? What lawyer interviews a prisoner today? They get to sit in on the interview, but they don't take part in it. They write down what's said, take notes. Yeah, these guys probably did that. But I believe that there was a priest that was doing the torturing. So I think the Spanish Inquisition did happen. As I said, it was probably exaggerated. But to say that the Spanish Inquisition, because it was exaggerated, we should wipe it clean of the history of the Catholic faith and give them a pass on it. Well, there's a lot of evidence for an exodus of Jews and Protestants and Muslims from Spain during that period. But they just decided that, I don't like Spain anymore. Was that what happened? In the height of its rise to prominence in Europe, when it would probably be a great place to be any kind of trader, you know, any kind of farmer producing food, any kind of winemaker, any kind of cloth maker, any trader, any that owned a shop, you know, it would have been a great place to make money and raise a family, as long as you weren't being persecuted. So why did they all leave? It doesn't make sense to me that they would all just leave a country that's blooming. And as he says, it says at the very start of this what I'm going to show you, Spain rose to great heights at that time in Europe and dominated most of the other European nations at the time. It was almost like what happened to Britain. Britain rose to prominence shortly after this by conquering the world almost, you know, with its navy, and fought Spain and France, dominated them, rose to great heights in the historic annals of the world, you know, and it was a fantastic place for making money. And at that time people were flooding into Britain. They weren't leaving it, they weren't running away, not even the Catholics who were persecuted by the Protestant kings, not even the Protestants when they had Catholic kings ruling through this period. Did they leave? No, they decided they would like to stick around, make money, and hopefully not lose their heads or get burnt at the stake. So why did so many people leave Spain during that period? I can only imagine that, although he says during a small period of time 400 English people were killed, not mostly Catholics by Protestants, but at the same time in France there was, you know, over the same period of time, thousands of people being killed, Protestants by Catholics, you know. And he's trying to make out that Spain was such a lovely place that surely all these people would have left. Just like today when there's a war and you're getting killed, people up sticks, they take everything they can carry and they fuck off across the border. Why didn't that happen in England and fucking France at the time? The only time you actually see that happening in France is when the revolution comes and people are actually getting their heads chopped off willy-nilly daily. So I would imagine the flight of people to Spain must have been comparable, I'd have thought, to the French Revolution, for them to leave in such numbers. And yet this guy says, oh no, we only killed 50 people, 50 Protestants. over 100 years, over a century, you know. Whilst in England they were killing 400 people over a period of 3 or 4 years, you know. Yeah. I think his love of the Catholic faith and the love of meeting the Pope, you know what I mean? I think that drove him to take part in this documentary and to review history with a bent towards the Catholics having been such wonderful people during that time and slighted, I mean, totally slighted and slandered by the Protestants around Europe, you know. Anyway, I'll put this up in a little while, and I hope you go and look. I'll put a link in the to the actual documentary. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Typical rewriting of fucking history. You see it all the time in America at the moment when the Republicans try to rewrite what happened only fucking 10 years ago. The last 10 years, as far as the Republicans are concerned, the Iraq War was a wonderful fucking idea. Isn't it just turning out great for America that he's went into Iraq and Afghanistan? Oh, it's fucking wonderful. You know what I mean? These are a booming economy at the moment, aren't they, because of that? Yeah.
In 1570, 2 years after the death of Don Carlos, and with Spanish armies occupying much of Europe, the propagandists achieved their greatest coup. A document was circulated which purported to come from the Spanish Inquisition itself, but is now proved a forgery. It alleged that the Inquisition had decided to exterminate entire populations for heresy. This would prove the most damning and durable accusation of all, that the Spanish Inquisition claimed hundreds of thousands, even millions of victims, an allegation which was the opposite of the truth.
In 16th century Spain, and dealing only in terms of Protestant heresy, fewer people died for heresy in Spain than in any other Western country. The Inquisition, for example, in the whole of the 16th century, maybe executed something like about 40 or 50 people at the outside in the whole of Spain, in the whole of the 16th century, and that includes, of course, the whole of America as well. Whereas within a small group of years, which are the reigns, we get at least the execution of 400 English people at the hands of, if we may call it, the English Inquisition, namely the English authorities who are in charge of executing people of the opposing religion.